Each morning, the same shadow appeared at the corner of Maple and Fifth, a scrawny dog with patchy fur and tired eyes. He had been there for weeks, tucked into the small space near an old bench, away from the busy crosswalks. With his head low and his body hunched, he didn't seem to care much for the hustle of the world around him. People passed by in a blur, coffee cups in hand, briefcases clutched tightly, children skipping ahead of their parents. The street was alive with movement, but none of it stopped for the dog. Some people took a quick look at him and quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. His thin, brown fur barely covered his ribs, and his tail, once lively, now drooped at his side. His eyes, however, were the most striking thing about him. Wide, almost pleading, as if waiting for someone to take pity on him, to show him some kindness. But no one ever did. The dog had a routine. He would stay in that same spot, day after day, as the world passed him by. At dawn, he would slowly rise from the corner where he lay, stiff and careful, and take a few wobbly steps around the area. He had clearly been hurt. His left leg limped, dragging slightly behind him. He would scavenge for scraps in the bushes or search the sidewalk for something, anything that might fill his stomach. Sometimes, someone would drop a few crumbs of food near him, but most of the time, people just ignored him, too busy with their own lives to stop for a sick, stray dog. Once in a while, a car would slow down, a concerned driver rolling down their window, but they never stopped. They never got out of their car. They never made the effort to find out who he was or why he was there. They simply drove off, telling themselves someone else would help him. The problem, it seemed, was always someone else's to solve. The dog didn't seem to mind much. He had learned long ago not to expect anything from the people around him. But he did seem to hope, just a little. Each morning, he would watch the people pass, his eyes flicking from one face to another, searching for something, someone who might notice his plight. But each time, he was met with indifference. And so, the dog would settle back down again on the sidewalk, curling into a ball with his head tucked into his paws, as if he was trying to disappear. The world was too busy to care. And so, he waited. As the days dragged on, the dog's condition only seemed to worsen. His fur, once a soft shade of brown, was now matted and dull, clinging to his frail body. He had grown thinner with each passing day, his ribs visible beneath the patchy fur. His limp had worsened, and the tiredness in his eyes deepened, as if he were carrying the weight of 1,000 forgotten sorrows. Yet he never strayed far from the corner near the bench. This small patch of sidewalk had become his world, his home. There were times when his stomach would growl loudly, echoing in the silence of the street. But no one heard it, not really. Pedestrians hurried by, their footsteps loud against the pavement, each person caught up in their own life. Some glanced at him, others avoided eye contact, but no one ever stopped. No one ever really saw him. It was as if the dog had become part of the scenery, an invisible fixture on the sidewalk, unnoticed and ignored. Some people, well-meaning but distant, would offer a quick glance or an awkward gesture. A woman with a shopping bag might stop momentarily, shake her head, and then keep walking, as if pity was enough. A man walking his own dog would slow down, but only long enough to make sure his dog stayed on the leash, never quite acknowledging the stray. It seemed like the dog didn't belong here. He was out of place in a world that had no room for him. Every so often, someone would cross the street to avoid walking too close to him. Their eyes would flicker to the dog, but they wouldn't break stride. They'd move away, uncomfortable or unsure, leaving him in the quiet, cold shadow of the city. But the dog never asked for anything. He didn't bark or wag his tail to beg for attention. He simply sat there watching the world go by, watching the people move on, day after day, as though he was invisible. It wasn't that he didn't feel the pain of hunger or the ache in his leg. He did. His body was thin and worn, and every movement seemed to cost him energy he no longer had. The air was cold in the mornings, and even colder at night, but the dog didn't complain. He just waited, hoping that someone, anyone, might finally stop and see him, not just as a stray, but as a creature in need, as someone who deserved care. The dog had given up on the idea of rescue a long time ago. He knew that if help came, it would be by chance, not because anyone had cared enough to seek him out. He had become a fixture in the world, like an unspoken truth no one was willing to face. But still he waited, because somewhere deep inside, there was still a flicker of hope. It was a warm, golden afternoon when Lily and her mother, Sarah, took their usual walk to the nearby park. Lily, just 2 years old, had endless energy. Her tiny feet took eager, bouncing steps as she skipped along the sidewalk, her favorite stuffed bunny tucked tightly in her arms. Sarah, keeping a gentle hold on her daughter's hand, smiled as they made their way down the street, the sun casting a soft glow over the trees. It was a simple, peaceful routine, one Sarah cherished, a moment to connect with her daughter before the evening chaos of dinner and bedtime. As they neared the corner of Maple and Fifth, Sarah's attention was diverted by a message on her phone. She glanced down, checking an email, unaware that Lily had stopped walking. When Sarah looked up, she saw her daughter several feet ahead, standing still and staring at something. Lily's bright blue eyes were locked onto the dog. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she quickly closed the gap between them. "Lily, sweetie, come back here," she called out, not understanding why her daughter had suddenly stopped. But Lily didn't move. Her tiny hand pointed at the dog, and she made a soft, curious noise, the way only a child can when they see something intriguing. Sarah's heart sank as she followed her daughter's gaze. There, lying in the same spot he always did, was the dog. His fur was even more matted than the last time Sarah had noticed him, and his head was resting weakly on his paws. Lily, with all the innocence and empathy that only a child could possess, didn't seem scared or repulsed by the dog. Instead, she was drawn to him, her face softening as she gazed at him, as though she knew there was something wrong. "Mama, look, Doggy's sad," Lily said in her sweet, toddler voice, her words a mixture of concern and curiosity. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, preparing to gently pull Lily away from the sickly animal. But before she could even say anything, Lily, without hesitation, took a few small steps closer to the dog. The air seemed to still as Sarah's heart raced. She had never seen Lily so determined before. Lily dropped to her knees, her stuffed bunny forgotten on the sidewalk as she reached out her little hand, fingers trembling slightly. "Doggy, okay," she whispered softly, her tiny palm hovering just above the dog's head. The dog, who had been barely lifting his head, suddenly seemed to sense the child's presence. His dull, tired eyes slowly shifted towards her, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of something that looked like recognition, like relief. The dog shifted slightly, lifting his head ever so gently to meet her gaze. And in that moment, everything seemed to change. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide, unsure of what to do next. But Lily, without fear, continued her approach, her hand now brushing softly against the dog's rough fur. It was as if the world had paused, and in that small, quiet corner of the city, only the two of them existed. Lily whispered again, "Doggy, be happy." Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing. She knew that the dog appeared sick and weak, and though she had often passed by, her heart ached for him. But this was something different. She had never seen Lily act this way before, especially not with a stray animal. And though her first instinct was to rush over and pull Lily away, something held her back. Lily had made a decision. There was no hesitation in her movements, no second thoughts. Her small hand continued to gently stroke the dog's rough, matted fur, as though she had done this 100 times before. Her face was full of concentration, her little brow furrowed with a sense of responsibility and care. The dog, surprisingly, didn't flinch or pull away. He remained still, his tired eyes slowly softening. "Mama, Doggy needs a friend," Lily said, her voice serious, as if she were making a simple statement of fact. Sarah swallowed hard. She had watched enough animal rescue videos to know that even the most gentle dogs could sometimes react unpredictably when approached by strangers, especially if they were sick or scared. She had been ready to pull Lily away in case the dog lunged or growled, but instead, the dog's quiet acceptance of her daughter was something neither she nor Lily had expected. The moment stretched on. Sarah took a cautious step forward, unsure whether to intervene or let Lily continue. It was as if the world around them had slowed, the noise of the busy street fading into the background. Lily's tiny voice broke the silence again. "Doggy, I give you my bunny," she said softly, glancing down at her stuffed toy. She held it out to the dog, offering it to him as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah's heart melted. She hadn't known what to expect from her daughter's actions, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Lily wasn't just offering her stuffed bunny as a distraction or out of curiosity. She was offering it as a gift, an act of kindness, without expecting anything in return. The dog, still lying there weakly, sniffed at the stuffed bunny for a moment before carefully reaching out his nose to touch it. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it felt significant. For the first time, the dog's expression seemed to shift. There was a sense of connection in his eyes, a moment of recognition that wasn't just about need, but about shared vulnerability. Sarah slowly crouched down next to Lily, her voice gentle but filled with awe. "Lily, honey, you're really helping him, aren't you?" Lily nodded earnestly, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Doggie's my friend now." At that moment, Sarah realized something profound. Lily wasn't just comforting the dog out of sympathy. She was doing what none of the adults had been able to do. She was seeing the dog for who he truly was. She wasn't just acknowledging his suffering. She was offering him something that everyone else had failed to provide: love, care, and the smallest act of kindness. A few people had gathered around, their eyes fixed on the scene. Some had been walking by and had stopped to watch the unusual interaction. Others pulled out their phones, quietly capturing the image of a small child offering friendship to a sick, stray dog. But the crowd was still silent, as if collectively holding their breath, watching to see what would happen next. The dog, for the first time in a long while, seemed to settle a little deeper into the concrete, no longer so tense or restless. The strange, unspoken connection between him and Lily was undeniable. And in that moment, something shifted, not just for the dog, but for everyone watching. A small act of kindness, done without hesitation, had made the world seem just a little bit smaller, a little more hopeful. The quiet moment between Lily and the dog didn't go unnoticed for long. What had started as a small act of kindness from a curious toddler quickly caught the attention of others. At first, it was just one person, an older man watering his plants outside his house across the street. He had paused mid-spray, his gaze fixed on the girl and the dog. He lowered the hose, his brow furrowed in confusion as he watched the scene unfold before him. Then, a delivery driver who had been parked at the curb took a moment to observe what was happening. He stepped out of his van, glancing around uncertainly. His eyes met the dog's, and something about the stillness of the moment made him linger a little longer than he intended. He adjusted his cap, looked at the young girl kneeling beside the animal, and then pulled out his phone. Within minutes, more and more people began to take notice. It started with quiet glances, followed by people slowly stopping in their tracks. The usual rhythm of the street had shifted. No longer was everyone rushing forward, heads down, preoccupied with their day. Instead, they paused, instinctively drawn toward the unspoken connection between the little girl and the stray dog. Some walked closer, but not too close, as if unsure what to do next. A woman with a stroller crossed the street, her eyes wide with wonder as she observed the unexpected scene. She stopped beside the bench where the dog lay, her hand instinctively going to her mouth as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Others, some with children in tow, did the same, approaching cautiously but standing at a distance. A couple of teenagers, walking hand in hand, stopped beside the sidewalk and leaned over to see the dog. One of them pulled out their phone, tapping away to snap a picture. The photo went unnoticed by the toddler, who was still tenderly petting the dog, but the teens shared it almost immediately, letting it ripple through social media. By the time the photo was posted, it was already starting to go viral, though no one in the scene knew it yet. The scene wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with frantic action or drama, but there was a quiet kind of power to it. The people who stopped didn't immediately rush to help the dog, but they couldn't help but stare. There was something about the tenderness of the moment, Something about the purity of Lily's gesture that made even the most indifferent passersby pause. It made them think. Someone finally made a move. A man, probably in his late 40s, dressed in a faded jacket, stepped forward, holding a half-empty water bottle. He offered it to the dog, holding it carefully to the animal's mouth. The dog sniffed the bottle but didn't drink. Still, it was a small step, a gesture that was more than most had offered. At this point, a few people were beginning to talk among themselves. Should we call someone? One woman asked, her voice laced with concern. The dog looks sick. Shouldn't we do something? A few heads nodded, but no one moved just yet. They watched the dog, watched Lily, and waited. Everyone was waiting for something, maybe for someone else to act, maybe for the right moment. But Lily had already done what was necessary. She had started the change. And with that, the world around them had begun to shift. It wasn't a sudden change, but a subtle one. People were no longer walking past the dog. Instead, they were seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. The moment the first concerned person reached for their phone, everything changed. By the time the woman with the stroller had pulled up her social media, a network of compassion had already begun to form. People were taking notice, tagging friends, sharing the picture of Lily, kneeling with unspoken sincerity beside the frail dog. The photo of the toddler, tenderly cradling the stray, spread like wildfire online, capturing hearts across the city and beyond. The local animal rescue, a small but dedicated nonprofit called Hope Paws, was one of the first to respond. Their phone rang off the hook as soon as the viral photo hit. Animal lovers across the community had seen what had happened and were reaching out to make sure the dog wasn't forgotten. The outreach was swift, driven by a collective urgency sparked by Lily's simple act of kindness. A few minutes after the photo was posted, a small animal rescue van pulled up to the corner of Maple and Fifth. It wasn't flashy or loud, but there was a sense of quiet purpose in the way the volunteers moved. Two women in matching blue jackets stepped out, one holding a clipboard, the other carrying a large, collapsible crate. They had heard about the dog from a concerned local, and they had seen the social media buzz, but they couldn't have prepared themselves for the moment they stepped up to the dog. The volunteers approached cautiously, understanding that a sick dog could react unpredictably, especially with a crowd now gathering. But when the dog lifted his head and looked at them with those soft, tired eyes, there was a sense of surrender in his gaze, almost like he understood that help had finally arrived. Lily, still on her knees beside the dog, didn't move. She had already given him all the love she could offer, but now she looked up at the volunteers with a gaze of quiet trust. It was as if she knew they were there to finish what she had started. "Is he?" one of the volunteers asked, her voice gentle. She was looking down at the dog, noting his disheveled coat, his exhausted breathing. "We're going to take good care of you, okay?" she cooed softly to the animal. The dog's eyes flicked to the woman's face and then back to Lily, who had placed her hand on his back. The connection between the two, the girl who had shown him affection and the volunteers ready to help, was palpable. It was as though the dog had been waiting for someone to care, for someone to take him in. One of the volunteers bent down, placing the crate gently in front of the dog, and the other knelt beside him. They checked his injuries, noting the slight limp and the frailness of his body. There were signs of dehydration and malnutrition, but the dog still seemed to hold on to the smallest sliver of hope. He didn't resist the volunteers as they coaxed him into the crate, the journey toward recovery beginning with the first gentle steps. In that moment, Lily stood up slowly, her little hand still held out, as if offering one last gesture of comfort. The dog, now gently placed into the crate, seemed to calm, the fear of the unknown replaced by the trust of those who had come for him. Sarah, who had stood back the entire time, finally breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at Lily, who was still gazing at the dog with those wide, innocent eyes. "You did something amazing today, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, crouching down beside her daughter. Lily smiled, her face lighting up with the simplest of joys. The volunteers, now with the dog safely in the van, smiled and waved at the small crowd that had gathered. "We'll take him to the vet right away," one of them said. "Thank you for helping him." As the van pulled away, the people on the sidewalk stood still for a moment, watching it disappear around the corner. It was a quiet departure, but the impact of what had happened would stay with them all. The dog was no longer just a stray. He was a story, a moment of kindness that had spread through a community and beyond. The following days after the dog's rescue brought a wave of change, not just for him, but for the whole community. The quiet corner where the dog had spent his days, alone and forgotten, became a symbol of compassion. People returned to the spot, standing for a moment in silent reflection, as if paying tribute to the unexpected bond that had changed everything. Word about Lily's act of kindness spread beyond social media. The local news picked up the story, and soon the small viral moment blossomed into something much larger. The photo of Lily offering her bunny to the sick dog, taken on that fateful afternoon, became a symbol of the power of simple acts of care. The city's residents felt a collective sense of pride for their own community, which had come together in response to a child's innocent gesture. But while the story of the dog's rescue made its rounds on the internet, there was still one important chapter that needed to be written: the dog's recovery. Hope Paws, the animal rescue that had stepped in, worked tirelessly to give him the care he needed. The dog, now named Charlie by the volunteers, was taken to a local veterinarian, where they found that his injuries were worse than expected. He had been severely malnourished, and his leg injury required surgery. The vet wasn't sure how long he had been living on the streets, but it was clear that he hadn't received proper care for a long time. As the days passed, Charlie's condition began to improve. He was given fluids to rehydrate him, and slowly his appetite returned. His fur began to shine again, and though he still limped, the spark of life that had been missing for so long started to flicker back in his eyes. The volunteers at Hope Paws were dedicated, caring for him with the patience and tenderness he so desperately needed. They knew that Charlie's recovery would take time, but he was finally on the right path. Lily's family was kept updated on Charlie's progress. Every few days, Sarah would receive a call from the rescue center, telling her about his improvement. And each time, Lily would smile as her mother relayed the news, proudly telling her that she had helped him. Weeks later, after Charlie had gained enough strength, the rescue center made a special decision. They decided to make a public announcement. They wanted to show the world the power of kindness, and they knew that Lily's connection to Charlie had been the catalyst. They invited Lily and her family to come to the rescue center for a visit. On the day of the visit, Sarah and Lily walked into the center, and there, in a cozy corner of the facility, was Charlie. His eyes, now full of life and warmth, recognized Lily immediately. His tail wagged weakly at first, but then, seeing her, he bounded over to her with a joy that was impossible to ignore. Lily knelt down, her arms wide open as Charlie rushed to her, his limp still there, but no longer slowing him down. Sarah watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. She had seen Lily's kindness from the start, but now, standing there in that moment, she realized just how much of an impact one small, brave act of love could have. "Mama, he's all better now," Lily said, her voice full of wonder. Sarah smiled softly, nodding. "Yes, sweetheart, he is. And it's all because of you." It was a new beginning for Charlie, who had found his second chance at life, and for the entire community, who had been reminded of the simple yet profound power of compassion. The story of a sick, forgotten dog and a toddler's unspoken kindness had come full circle, leaving behind a lasting reminder that sometimes the smallest hearts can make the biggest difference. The months that followed Charlie's rescue were filled with transformation, not just for him, but for everyone who had been touched by his story. The small, quiet gesture of a 2-year-old had sparked a movement of kindness that reverberated throughout the city and beyond. Charlie's recovery became a symbol of hope, and his journey was shared with countless others through social media, local news, and community events. Lily's simple act of compassion had captured the hearts of so many. It reminded everyone that kindness doesn't need to be grand or complicated. It can be as simple as a touch, a smile, or the quiet offering of a stuffed bunny. And people across the city began to embrace that message, finding ways to be kinder to animals, to one another, and to the world around them. Hope Paws, the rescue organization that had saved Charlie, saw a surge of support. Donations poured in from people who had heard about Lily and the dog, many of them inspired to help other animals in need. Volunteers came forward to offer their time, and more animals found their way to the shelter where they received the care and attention they deserved. The organization became a focal point for compassion, and the community rallied behind them, recognizing the importance of doing whatever they could to make a difference. As for Charlie, he became a local legend. After his recovery, he was adopted by a loving family who had been following his story. They had been waiting for the right moment, and when they saw the bond between Lily and the dog, they knew they had to be part of his life. Charlie thrived in his new home, his tail wagging constantly as he played with his new family. But he never forgot the girl who had saved him, the little one who had shown them kindness when no one else would. Lily, too, had changed. Though she was only 2 when she first reached out to the dog, the experience left a lasting impression on her. Sarah often found Lily talking to her stuffed animals, whispering kind words and offering them comfort, just as she had done with Charlie. It was clear that the lesson had stuck. Kindness was something that came from within, and it was something that could change the world. The city itself changed as well. People began to pay more attention to the stray animals in their neighborhoods, reaching out to shelters, offering food, and volunteering their time. It wasn't just about rescuing animals anymore. It was about creating a culture of empathy, where compassion and understanding were at the forefront. Lily and Sarah continued their daily walks, but now, whenever they passed the spot where Charlie had once lay, they would stop for a moment of reflection. The bench was still there, and while the dog was no longer in the corner, the memory of what had happened lingered in the air. It had been a moment of quiet power, of a child's unspoken love bringing a community together, changing lives in ways no one could have predicted. And every time Lily glanced down at her stuffed bunny, she would smile, knowing that the gift she had given so freely had led to something far greater than anyone had ever imagined. It wasn't just a dog that had been saved. It was a reminder that even the smallest hearts can create the biggest impact, and that kindness, no matter how small, could make the world a better place.